Hey everybody, this is Chris Brown, and today's topic in our pod is citizenship. How to apply for citizenship if you are a permanent resident, and other ways you can get citizenship in Canada. What are the benefits of citizenship, and also the criteria, eligibility process, timeline, all of that. And before I get started, I want to just remind people the difference between what's a permanent resident and what's a citizen. Basically, under the laws, they are, the privileges are almost the same. So as a permanent resident, you get to get health care, live in Canada, pay taxes, own property, work, study, have kids, whatever, all that stuff. And then as a citizen, you get three extra things, okay? You get, first of all, the option to get a passport. Second of all, you get to vote. And third, you are no longer required to physically be in Canada as a permanent resident to maintain your status. Right? As a permanent resident, remember, you have to be physically present in Canada for 2 years out of every 5-year period in order to become or maintain your PR status. Whereas a citizen can leave Canada for an indefinite period of time and never have to worry about ever losing their citizenship. In fact, even if you were arrested and, charged with a big crime, you would be housed and jailed in Canada because you are now a Canadian citizen. So becoming a citizen is not only a privilege and a honor, but it's also legally you are now, calling Canada your home, which means if something bad happens to you, then you will be prosecuted and brought back to Canada. So let's break it down in terms of how the application actually looks and what are some key factors that you have to be aware of when you apply for citizenship. The first rule is that you have to obviously become a permanent resident first before you are a citizen. Now, there's two exceptions to this. If you were born of a Canadian parent or born of a Canadian grandparent, so like at the time of your birth, if your dad or mom was Canadian, that means you can direct apply for citizenship. Or if at the time of your birth, this is a very recent rule, at the time of your birth, if your grandparents were Canadian citizens, then you can apply directly for citizenship. And that is a huge advantage to a lot of people. It's also an advantage to kids that are born overseas in general. And that's another perk of becoming a citizen. If you are a citizen and then move to another country and have kids, those kids are granted citizenship at their birth. There's still an application process to go through, but they have to, you get to apply directly. They don't have to go through permanent residency. They can go direct to citizenship. But for most people, who have gone the immigrant journey, they're going to be going through a work study permit, permanent residency, or maybe they've been sponsored by their spouse. They've gone through permanent residency that way. They're going to have to obtain citizenship by way of the usual way, which is maintaining the residency and then also the other requirements. So the first one is residency. You have to have proven that you are or have been physically present in Canada for 3 years within the last 5-year period. So the day you sign the application, working backwards, you have to have proven that 3 of those years were physically present in Canada. Does it have to be consecutive? No. So you could, for example, spend the first year out of Canada, the second year in Canada, the third year out, and then the next 2 in, and you've met the requirement. Now, proving the travel history is just by declaration. So you basically just write out all the dates that you were outside Canada. And then there's like a kind of an online calculator system they have where they'll calculate how many days you were outside Canada. And then within that 5-year window, then they'll say, have you met the requirement or not? By the way, IRCC does track your travel in and out of Canada. Once you become a permanent resident, you have, basically a record of you entering and exiting Canada. So IRCC can match what you say to their records, which is important to remember. You can't just make it up, okay? For some people, they have trouble recalling their travel history, and it's an issue when they're applying for citizenship. So what I've done is I've, get them to get the best recollection of the possible of their travel. And then I write a letter of explanation to accompany the application to say, listen, this is the best recollection. There might be some variance on some of the dates. But generally speaking, like, it's not a question of like, are you a day or two within the criteria? Like, you've clearly spent more than 3 years in Canada. So it's okay that, my 2-week trip to Spain was only 12 days versus 14 days, right? So permanent residency in Canada, when you're a permanent resident, you're going to want to track your travel. Just keep an Excel spreadsheet handy every time you enter and exit Canada. Record that, trip so that when it comes time to apply for citizenship, you'll have everything ready to go. Also true for renewing your PR card. If you're a PR and you want to maintain your PR status, maybe while you're applying for citizenship as well, you need that travel history documented as well. The second bit for citizenship is language proficiency. Now, it's not like permanent residency where you have to supply like a very sort of structured, legitimate language test. They only want to see that you're proficient in speaking and listening. So there's a kind of a dumbed down language test that you would take from one of the testing institutions like Pearson or IELTS or CELPIP. And you have to achieve a CLB level 4, which is kind of an above average or an average level. Now, you're exempted from that test if you are under the age of 18 or over the age of 54. So that's good news for kids and seniors. Also, you're exempted from the test is if you can prove that you have obtained some sort of credential or some sort of diploma from an English speaking school, like even an elementary school. So if you've attended a school in elementary that happened to be English speaking and the language of instruction was English, you get a letter from the school, or you get a transcript, or you get a copy of your diploma, and you can use that as proof of English or French proficiency. So the requirement for language is a lot different than it is for permanent residency. Citizenship language tests are much easier, and you can use other examples like school diplomas to prove your proficiency. The next bit is tax filing. So as a permanent resident, you're probably earning income in Canada. Most people that do earn income are filing taxes. That's our law. Our tax law says that if you earn income, you pay income tax, you have to file your taxes. So that's a requirement actually for citizenship. If you have to have filed taxes in the last 3 years, if you're required to do so. So if you're earning income, then you're required to file taxes. That's your obligation to do so. I've had like horror stories from clients who are permanent residents and then they don't file taxes. They haven't been properly briefed on the requirement to file. And then suddenly they want to apply for citizenship and they find out that when they file taxes, they find out they're going to owe $100,000 worth of income tax. And I mean, that's the cold hard truth. You have to pay it eventually. But if you're a permanent resident and you're required to file, then you must file. But if you're not required to file because you don't earn income, or maybe you're living off a pension and you're not really, you're under the threshold for taxation, then you are exempted from that rule. I would advise you to contact your accountant, your tax accountant in Canada, to see if you're required to file taxes. And if you are, then get that done before you apply for citizenship. There is a test, a knowledge test to become a citizen, and that is a requirement. Eventually, you do have to do this 30-question multiple choice test. The 30 questions are taken from a bank of 100 questions that the Government of Canada has released. So if you wanted to make sure you're going to pass the test, you can always study all 100, knowing that only 30 will be asked. What are the questions about? I mean, they're basically Canada's history in the last 100 years, basically. A lot of the questions have to do with Canada's impact in the world, contributions globally, what it means to be a Canadian citizen, the values of a Canadian citizen, some geography questions. How many provinces and territories do we have? What are the oceans that border our country? Who's our head of state? They always ask that one, and many people think it's the prime minister. It is not. It happens to be the King of England. So that's the kind of stuff that, although daunting, it's kind of fun to know, because you're becoming a citizen, you're going to be representing Canada for the rest of your life. It's your obligation and duty to know a little bit of history about Canada. So whenever you're kind of applying for citizenship, you would then, I guess, go online, look at the questions, start studying up and being prepared for that test. If you fail the test, it's okay. You get to take it again. It's not going to cancel the application. I think you get 2 strikes before they cancel the application, then make you reapply. So it's not a big deal. No one I've ever met has ever failed the application. It's just a question of doing a little bit of preparation and just, being ready for it. Again, it's actually self-done online. So you basically get sent a link and you click it and you do the test your own way. So lots of resources online to practice for that test as well. And you are exempted from the knowledge test. Same rule as the language. So like basically if you're under the age of 18 or over the age of 55, you don't have to do the test at all. Which is helpful for most people. So basically the application looks like this. You get your application package together. You can submit online or on paper. Consultants like myself are obligated to submit on paper. We don't get the online option. So I've been always submitting on paper my whole career, but online apparently is pretty smooth and slick as well. You will get your travel history uploaded. You will get your address history uploaded, your personal history, your employment history, basic information about yourself. And then you have documents. You're going to need a primary ID, like a passport. You're going to need a secondary primary ID, like a driver's license. And your travel history has to be documented. There's a special form they get you to fill out for that as well. You're going to need citizenship photos taken of yourself, the same kind of style photos you did for your permanent residency. And then all that is submitted online or by paper, right? And you don't really hear anything for, I would say, 2-3 months. And then you'll get an email saying that we've received your application. And that then you don't hear anything for another 2 or 3 months. And then another email coming on board. This would be the citizenship test. So they give you an email saying, it's time to do your citizenship test. Here's the date of the test. Here's a link you can use. They give you a date range to do it, actually. They say you have to do it between this date and this date. Here's your link. Here's your access code. Log in, do the test. So you would study, do the test. That bit's done, checked and uploaded. And then the next bit you get is kind of fun. It's the invitation for the oath, the citizenship oath, which is a requirement to become a citizen. So the oath is actually where you stand up in front of a judge and you provide, an allegiance oath to Canada. Back before COVID, we did all these oaths in person in the sort of the government houses throughout the provinces. And they're big ceremonies. I mean, like the ceremonies would have hundreds of people, maybe even 1,000 in one room, all ready to become Canadian citizens. And, like the vibe is not like it's a celebratory mood. This is the day you're going to become a Canadian citizen. The judge is there. Everybody's kind of cheering, and that's kind of the vibe that you get when you do them. These days they're actually done online through a video conferencing tool. And so you sign in and you're there with like literally a bunch of hundreds of different other people all in these little boxes on the video conferencing. And everyone's, sitting there with Canada flags, they're ready to do their oath. And then a judge appears and the judge is wearing a robe and they're, in an office or a desk or something. And then they'll, ask you to stand up, and they'll ask you to take your PR card actually and cut it in half, because you are no longer a permanent resident. You are now a citizen. So you have to now destroy your permanent resident card in front of the judge. It's funny how that works, but that's just, many permanent residents have trouble doing that because it's their pride and joy. But they have to cut the card. Once they've cut the card, they stand up, they do the oath of citizenship, and they sing the national anthem. And at that point, you are a Canadian citizen. Finalizing the application, after all that's done, you have the option of getting a paper certificate, which is something that you can hang on a wall. You can keep it, in a special spot, or you can just simply get an e-certificate. The e-certificate being, something that is not formal looking, but it does prove your citizenship. And then you'd use that document itself to apply for a passport. And once you have your passport becomes your new proof of citizenship. So, citizenship is a privilege in Canada, and I'm a big fan. That's our immigration system is geared towards making citizens. That's the goal of the immigration system. It's actually written into the act. That's the goal. So, again, like the immigrant journey in Canada is crazy these days. There's a lot of scrutiny. There's a lot of deadlines. There's a lot of criteria to meet. And people that immigrate to Canada have been through a lot. I know this because I work with them every day. And then suddenly you get to this point where you're doing an oath, or you're, about to become a citizen, and everyone's celebrating. And that it's like this weight is lifted off your shoulders. You no longer have to ever worry about being allowed to come back to Canada, ever in your life. You have a Canadian passport. You are able to travel to any country in the world, But more on that, you get to become part of our Canadian history and our Canadian story. Canada is a country built on immigrants. It's built on a strong reputation of immigrant tolerance and immigration. We have a story to tell, which involves you becoming a citizen of Canada, because this is what we want. We want to have more citizens in Canada. So if you're in the permanent residency status right now, I encourage you to take a look at becoming a citizen. But think about it not just from like a convenience factor, but also, are you ready for that obligation, that privilege, and that honor? Will you represent Canada and our values in the world, right? Because that's kind of what citizens are asked to do. But if you are up for it, then the time would be now to apply. We have, a system that is processing these applications quite quickly, 6 to 8 months, which is quite nice. In the immigration world, most things take at least a year. So it's nice to see that we are prioritizing these applications so that we're making more citizens in Canada. And, for the most part, I am super happy for my clients that reach that stage. It's a lifetime achievement. And my job is done. There's nothing else I can do for them after they become a citizen of Canada. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this content and you're learning something about that process in general. If you have a question or comment for me, be sure to actually leave me something in the comment section, and I'll do my best to answer that in a future pod. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, for future updates and deep dives into immigration topics. I'm Chris Brown from Tudor House Immigration. I thank you for listening. Talk to you next time.